All right, welcome to the last panel of the day, and we are the largest one here, so hopefully we can add value to you. This panel is themed around the changing business of cybersecurity through investment, and it really seizes upon the moment that we have, which we're dealing with a national and international crisis, in that cyberspace has become very uncivilized and much more hostile. It's a brave new world where you have a multiplicity of actors that are acting in a free fire zone. And the cybersecurity technologies that we've deployed are failing miserably against the targeted attacks, the APTs, and the embedded threats that we see every day. So my esteemed panelists and I are here to discuss what our strategies are per investment and how we deploy these technologies and best defend the typical American, European, and Asian customer. In so much to describe so, each one of us will briefly describe our backgrounds, the organizations we work for, and what our thesis is or strategy as it relates to cybersecurity investment. So I'll begin. My name is Tom Kellermann. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Strategic Cyber Ventures. And in so much, I came from 19 years of being a cybersecurity operator. Strategic Cyber Ventures focuses on Series B opportunities of cybersecurity capabilities solely. These capabilities must be complementary and must achieve underlying thesis of intrusion suppression, which is to detect, deceive, divert, contain, and then hunt the adversary unbeknownst to the adversary. Think of a Supermax prison. And with that, I'll hand it off.
Hey, my name is Mike Janke. I'm one of the co-founders of DataTribe, which is a very unique type of crucible where we draw technology teams out of the Five Eye Nation intelligence agencies, and we build cybersecurity, big data, and analytics companies with them. My background is I'm a former member of SEAL Team 6 and a 7-time tech entrepreneur and CEO.
Good afternoon. My name is Ping Lee. I'm with Accel Partners. Accel is an early-stage venture capital and growth equity firm. We started in the early 80s in Silicon Valley. Focus has always been around consumer internet technologies, enterprise IT, infrastructure and applications. In the recent years, we've expanded globally as well. We have a team and a fund in Europe and Israel, as well as a team in India. And we also have a growth equity fund, which does more kind of later stage companies outside of Silicon Valley, which is primarily focused on two guys in the garage and a woman and a dog starting a company.
Hi, I'm Cheri McGuire. I'm the Group Chief Information Security Officer for Standard Chartered Bank, based out of London. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold here. I left DC about 10 months ago. Previously was with Symantec, Microsoft, Booz Allen, DHS, and a whole bunch of other places. See a lot of friendly faces out there, so great to see all of you again. My role at Standard Chartered, which is a global bank, 90% of our business is Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. About 85,000 employees worldwide. And my role there is around managing the governance and strategy for cybersecurity within the bank. Includes everything from third-party risk management to training and awareness, to board of directors engagement, to dealing with regulators and a host of other activities. So great to be with you today.
All right, my name is Elie Wurtman. I'm from Israel. I'm the managing partner of a local venture capital fund called PICO Venture Partners. Broad background in consumer internet companies, enterprise software, and cyber security software over the last 3 years. My first investment was in government-related cyber technology, which scared me quite a bit, and realized that there should be a great opportunity in cyber defensive technologies. Israel perhaps is the most, I think, prolific startup market for cyber-related startups in Israel, perhaps too much so. We've had probably 500 startups funded in the last 3 years dedicated to cyber. And my focus has been on what do you do with 20-something-year-olds who have seen probably the most cutting-edge cyber warfare technologies get out of the military at the age of 23, 24, 25 and think they're worth tens of millions of dollars and have the best idea for a cyber startup. So we've really focused on helping find the best talent, and going beyond what I would say is a lot of niche investing and looking at a bigger, roll-up play of holistic complementary technologies under one roof with a single approach to the market. And that's what we're up to right now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Williams, Director of Blackbird Technology at Raytheon. And first, let me just thank Catherine and Georgetown for the invitation and for this session. This is my first year, and I guess this is our 7th year of this forum. And it is important that we spend time, and I compliment you all for spending time digging into computer security. It's an interesting problem. I don't know of any other problem that transcends governments and industry and all segments of industry, but we certainly have that challenge with computer security. So I mentioned I'm from Raytheon. Raytheon is a $23 billion a year company, aerospace and defense and cyber. We have been helping defend U.S. government networks for 30 years. Recently, we have, as we talk about acquisitions on this panel and other business moves, recently we have had completed a joint venture that has created a company called ForcePoint, whose purpose is to bring that defense-grade capability, cybersecurity capability out to the commercial market. One of the things that again, I think my perspective on the panel from a large corporation, as we talk about strategy, Raytheon has had a strategy for over 12 years in the cyber area. Simply put, it starts with making sure that our network is secure, then making sure that our products and our platforms are designed to be resilient, to be designed to be as hardened as they can be, and to make sure that we provide those products in that way. And now we're taking the experience from those first 2 steps and continuing to bring that to other markets and other adjacencies. And as part of that cyber strategy, in the last 12 years, we have conducted M&As, acquired 18 companies, investing about $3.6 billion. The majority of that is for acquisition. I'm glad to be with you today.
My name's Richard Wells. I'm a partner with a firm called Insight Venture Partners. Insight's an investment firm focused on a particular kind of company, a particular kind of stage. So we spend almost all of our time in software focused on growth stage companies. So when we show up, a company, a software company, and typically this is business software, has products, customers, revenue, and a lot of growth. And our big focus is finding companies that have all those ingredients as well as the opportunity to build a larger scale company that's able to sustain that growth. We're doing this at scale. We've raised over $13 billion. We're investing out of a fund that's just under $5 billion in size. We're collectively engaging with over 30,000 software companies in a given year, investing in 10 to 20. And cybersecurity has been a big area of focus for us for a long time and continues to be an active area today.
Yeah, hello. My name is Klaus Mühleck. I'm from Germany. I'm the new CIO of the Department of Defense since approximately now 6 months. I joined this community last year when the decision was made in Germany that we build up these cyber activities in the Ministry of Defense. I'm from the industry. I served over 30 years as a CIO for the big German companies like Daimler or Volkswagen, or as well ThyssenKrupp, a competitor to Raytheon, you know that. But at the end, the decision was made that there is a need for industry competencies in the administration. So for me, it's as well a new experience to be in this group. And the decision we made in Germany, especially our minister made, was to have different activities in place. One activity was started this month. It's our new cyber general. He got a new command. It's a service for its own. It's a cyber service in the Army in parallel to the Navy, to the Air Force, and to the Army, of course. That's new for Germany, and I think it's a premiere as well for the world. But together 14,000 IT professionals is not only to have IT cyber specialists under control, As well, we invest in our intelligence services, so the National Geographic Agency as well is as well part of this organization. The control systems, they are a kind of function, a shared function, which supports the rest of the army. But this is not the only thing we decided. In the other extreme, we decided to have an innovation hub in place. So we hired people, startup guys from the market, which made their money. Yeah, they are independent, of course, and those guys, they get the chance here to build up this innovation hub, the cyber innovation hub in Berlin. And the 30, 40, or 50 guys are now scouting and investigating the startup market so that all the technologies we need for our different operations, either in our cloud environment or in our military environment, all that such kind of innovations we could incubate on the one hand, on the other hand, that we can get those technologies, especially what we need to have in our big projects. We invest billions in IT, of course, in Germany, like the US as well, but we have to differentiate between innovations on the one hand and stabilize our current investment in our back-end systems, in our networks, in our data centers, in our cloud environments as a total architecture. My function is to govern all of those different activities. And they are divided up in the 4 areas: people, technology, processes, and organizations. And a part of our organization as well is Bundeswehr University, the military university in Munich, which was decided as well to build up dozens of cyber professors so that we get all the investigations and research people under control, more or less, that they are part of the military activities. And this is together with the industry. So Munich will become the German cyber hub for educating young people together with other universities, of course, in Germany, like the Fraunhofer Institute and the Max Planck universities. But the Department of Defense decided to go this way, and this is new for Germany, and I think it's a little bit a new way as well we go in an administration. Thanks a lot.
So on that point, which of the VC companies do you see as adding the most value to your initiatives? And is there a certain level of maturity that's necessitated by a VC-backed small company that necessitates before it's implemented across a large swath of German infrastructure or defense?
Yeah, venture capital is not our business today, but we try to get all the innovations scouted or investigated which is needed for our different implementations, like our mobile tactical communication, our satellite systems, or our geographical systems. So what we need is to get the right startups, the right companies selected, which can help us in our projects, in our big projects, to be more innovative than we are today. But we are not intending to invest venture capital now in the startup community. It's more or less that we scout and investigate those kind of companies, get the right approach in our big projects, which still are ongoing, big data projects, analytics projects, or Microsoft, SAP, HP, or whatever you take, IBM projects, which are part of our development. So we try to get this incubation done so that the startup culture is incubated our big projects so that we are more innovative than we are today.
Mr. McGuire, do you feel that smaller VC-backed companies have what it takes to add value to you and the security of your financial institution? If so, what level of maturity do they must be?
So I think this is a really tough question to answer. And the reason is because I work for a 160-year-old bank with a lot of legacy infrastructure spanning almost 70 different countries. And so when we start to look at various startups and new security technologies, the big question we have to ask ourselves is, 1, can it scale? And 2, will it be around a year or 2 years from now? And so those are key questions for us when we're doing that analysis of whether or not we're going to bring on new technology and security technology within the bank. But the flip side of that is that we also don't want to miss out on the newest technology that's being developed and what are some of the great innovations that are happening. And so that's where we start to look at things like innovation hubs, accelerators, and other types of organizations like that.
Thank you. For the gentlemen here who represent venture capital firms, there's a lot of consolidation in the industry occurring. If so, where? If not, how many companies do you think just provide features? Do you think that M&A, the process of M&A will clean up the mess, given that RSA, I think, had over 2,000 vendors this past year?
I'll start. Well, I mean, on the way over here, I actually looked at our security investments over the last 3 decades, and we have done more security investments or companies with a security direction in the last 3 years than we did in the prior 3 decades. So I don't think that's unique to Accel. I think that's a reflection of what is going on in the broader startup community and tech community in terms of security innovation. I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. I actually think that's a reflection of there's a tremendous amount of innovation going into security. Security is no longer a feature of IT. It is actually core to IT. And you're seeing up and down the stack from the infrastructures to the data to the application layer, all needing security as core to their functionality. So I think there's just an innovation curve right now that we're seeing across the board, and that's driving a lot of great ideas. And frankly, I think a lot of the incumbents are caught off guard by some of the changes in what's going on in technology, whether it's the cloud, it's mobile, it's agile development, et cetera. So I do think you're going to continually see a supply of startup activity. I don't think that's going to stop. I think there are going to be consolidation just because customers can only consume and digest and adapt so many technologies in a given year. But that's not to say that the innovation is going to slow down. I actually think security, if we look at our portfolio, are bigger now as companies than they were in prior decades. So I think the overall size of the opportunities has gotten a lot bigger. So I think as long as there's demand, there's always going to be supply on the startup side.
I think to build on that, one of the things we've observed, if you look at a lot of the largest kind of incumbents, so to speak, in enterprise security software, they've all gone through quite a bit of change over the last couple of years. Now you have 2 or 3 of them are either housed in LBOs or they're effectively a public LBO. And with, the implications of that is the focus of those businesses are less around growth or at least organic growth, and much more around rationalizing their operations, becoming more efficient, growing their profitability and cash flow, and frankly, looking to buy additional innovation. One of the key things a lot of these incumbents have is a very intimate knowledge of a lot of very large customers and how to make IT actually work by assembling a lot of different products in those customers. So those folks will not go away. They have very valuable customer relationships. They'll continue to buy, and they're setting their financials up so that they will continue to buy. I think one of the other things we've seen, and we sit typically a little bit more later stage from when Ping sits, is the last few years have marked a couple things in product markets. One is these product markets just systematically changed. They grew. They took this massive step function in terms of size and amount of spend that's out there in cybersecurity, and that's staying there. That is the new normal. That changed a couple years ago. That benefited a number of vendors disproportionately. It brought a whole bunch of venture in, and I agree with Ping. I don't think it ever goes away. One of the challenges now that a lot of the innovation has had is that there's a lot of great ideas, but these ideas and actually making them work and then addressing the friction of actually getting these products installed in a customer beyond just an initial set, that's a challenge. And you are seeing some products, some companies really emerge. I think you'll see a number of IPOs over the coming years of this kind of next wave. And I think those folks will turn around and become the next set of leading vendors that we'll be sitting here talking about 3 or 4 years from now. So there's a lot of dynamics in the market, but they have systematically changed. I think there's ingredients for both continued innovation at the startup level, but also a continued amount of very substantial M&A activity that I don't think is going to change anytime soon.
From my perspective, I have both a bottom-down and a bottom-up and a top-down view. Yeah, there's a lot of innovation out there, but there's also 7 to 8 times more companies focused on very similar issues. So if you're a CISO of a bank or a major corporation and you're trying to solve orchestration or endpoint security, there could be 25 to 35 well-funded startups, all with a different approach. So you'll see a natural pecking order in the ecology where the predators and the prey, where many of them fall by the wayside. You'll get a lot of them that go to B round. As you heard earlier, a lot of the big players that are publicly traded, they have to keep the revenue and earnings moving. And because of that, they become acquisitive. The other side of it is we, from our perspective, see more and more of the large implication disruptions, disruptive tech that isn't incremental. It's not 10% less filling and 15% less sugar than the other competitor, where you're not getting a 1 dB increase on bandwidth. Coming out of the intelligence agencies and some research labs, very well funded, over the last 4 to 5 years. And we're seeing that because of nation state issues. As the funding is ramped up against nation states, you're seeing more over-the-horizon technologies where intel agencies and Department of Defenses and research labs went from spending $20 million on a project to $400 million. So you're seeing some of these over-the-horizon big disruptions come out of there. The trick is, as my colleague mentioned earlier, it's one thing to have a disruptive technology, it's another thing to get somebody to write a check for it and to build a company out of it. So there will always be challenges, but I think cyber as a whole is really hitting a stride where you're having some really, really big fundamental disruptions that are changing the architecture of the stack itself, and a lot of opportunities. As cool kids out in the valley and garages start doing more IoT things, more wearables, you go to virtual reality and there's skin implants. There's always new and faster moving tech that comes out without security in it. So you're seeing a big shift where security is starting to become part of the initial design. And I think that's going to help a lot.
All right. Two ends of this. So one, I agree that the threat landscape is constantly changing. I think that a lot of what's out there, even with the big companies, is actually no longer relevant. So you could see a massive shift in the entire technological approach to cyber. And even though we've been selling a set of security products for the last 20 years, many of those will need to be replaced. And the value, and I come from the perspective in Israel where I think we actually have a decent supply of cyber technologists, the value of client relationships and the ability to productize this technology and to bring it to the clients will actually become more important in some cases than the unique aspects of the technology itself. From a very Israel micro perspective, my guess is half or more of the startups that have been funded will go out of business in the next couple of years, very quickly. And that's a risk factor for big banks who are implementing things. On the other hand, companies with business traction will find the funding because the market is big and it's growing and it's very real. Our approach is a consolidation approach, but I'm sure there'll be outsiders coming in to consolidate as well. But it's more about the clients and the ability to sell than I think it is purely technology.
All right, so to the group, what has your experience been with accelerators? If it's been a good experience, can you name one of note and describe the beneficial efforts? Anyone?
First. So we actually, at Standard Chartered, we have our own accelerator based out of Singapore, as that's one of our major operations hubs. Today we have more than 30 startups engaged. It is not specifically focused on cybersecurity. It's mostly around big data and analytics, but there's a number of proof of concepts and use cases that we're doing with startups that are focused on the insights and intelligence that can be gathered from those big data and analytics platforms that we're funding. In addition to that, we engage across our business units to find particular business use cases to engage directly with those startups, so that we're actually seeing how the technology will work with our business implementation, and whether or not it's something we want to move forward with, or it really may not work for the long term. So that's one of the things. There's some advantages to that we've seen. One is it gives us an opportunity to do leverage rapid design expertise, both internally and externally. It also allows for rapid prototyping capability, which we typically, being a very large legacy institution, have not had in our history. We tend to take longer in those development cycles than perhaps startups or new tech would. And then it also provides us a direct means to access those startups. Two other areas that we have something called SC Studios that we have based out in San Francisco, that we host meetings with the venture capital community to learn of the new investment areas that they are investing in, as well as to meet with startups. And I was just out in the Valley a month ago and met with a number of both new, very new security companies, and also what I would say more mid-size startups that are in Series B and Series C funding. That's a way also for us to access that new technology directly, and again, to look at whether or not that's something that we can start to do proof of concept and use cases internally. And then the third thing I'll just mention is we also are a sponsor of something called a Supercharger in Hong Kong, which is another big base of operations for us. And that also gives us access, again, to more the Asian market startups that we would not potentially have access to if we were only focused on Silicon Valley. So I think it's really important, particularly for global institutions like mine, that we are leveraging and looking at the different markets for innovation. I think there's a tendency sometimes to just think about Silicon Valley or Israel, and in fact, there's a lot of innovation going on around the world right now.
So we do a lot with incubators and accelerators. It's not necessarily a new concept. I think what's happened over the last, they've been around as part of the tech community for forever. What's happened, I think, in the last 5-10 years is the ability to develop software has gotten a lot cheaper and it got a lot faster, whether it's open source technology or Amazon and the cloud. You can get something going and build and test it and develop and tried with customers a lot quicker. So I think they played a big role in a lot of the innovation. We work with a whole bunch of them. Probably Y Combinator is the one that we do the most work with. And I always say it's not instead of, it's in addition to the venture capital and the company building parts that we bring to it. But I don't think it's going to slow down. I think as the technology gets more democratized globally, I think you're going to see it continue to be an important part of innovation.
We've had a good experience working actually with some of the big international banks. Barclays, Citibank have all set up accelerators in Israel with a specific focus on fintech and cyber technology. The huge advantage, I think the reason it's hugely important, a lot of small startups do have a very hard time getting into big banking environments. And Barclays, as an example, together with something called the CDA, which you may be a part of, set up in Tel Aviv with our assistance an entire environment, IT environment of a bank. And for a small startup to get access to that can really only happen through an approach of acceleration and allowing these ideas to be tested very quickly. And we've had a great experience working with them, and very senior people coming through, including the CEO of Barclays recently firsthand to see what's going on. And it's just raised the opportunities for startups to get into real commercial environments through an acceleration approach.
Well, coming from building seed stage, in my view, whether you call them an accelerator, an incubator, a crucible, or a startup factory, there's a very wide gamut, from Y Combinator to 500 startups, to regional focus. Look, there are accelerators in North Dakota and Wyoming, right? So a lot of it is the function of the pond you're fishing in and the quality of the rod you're using. So it's one thing to say we're going to foster innovation. It's another thing to actually build a company that gets through its B and C round and has 20, 30, $40 million worth of revenue from customers. That's a long landmine field. So, you know, when you think about kind of on one end, whether it's, you know, throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall, everything from dating apps to alpaca sock apps, right? You could have 50, 60 startups pitching, and folks will put some money in, and that's a very valuable commodity, believe it or not. It's a very valuable thing, all the way to, you know, where you're co-building a company like Team 8 out of Israel and probably DataTribe here in DC, where you're spending 14, 16 months with the company and you're co-building it. So there's a wide gamut of it, but it's like Ping said, it's not a new idea. And it's also regional. You get some places that are focusing on, you know, up in Boston on health tech and biotech. You get fintech out of New York and Singapore and, you know, London and some other places. So there are these regional hotbeds. But there was a comment made earlier that I think is really important. Sometimes the ability to have sales, marketing, product market fit is even more important than the technology itself to get the initial traction. And that's just a fact of life. I've seen some of the most novel, amazing tech in the world never made it out of a seed round, either through team dynamics or the product market fit or the advisory just wasn't there. So what we're seeing today in the commercial market is to have really, really smart people developing tech because of the cost of computing is so low is really important. But if it's not balanced with really, really experienced people who know product market fit and how you need to build a product for a customer to write the check, it's not catching today. So you're seeing you know, these early stage offering both. And it really is amazing when you see the communities. I mean, you got the Prairie Silicon, St. Louis area in Kansas City. That's actually kicking butt, believe it or not. To these regional areas that are fostering massive changes in economics, housing, real estate, gentrification, infrastructure with fiber. It's fascinating to see how quickly the country and the world has become tech first. And I don't just mean the phone that you stare at when you almost get hit by a car in a crosswalk. I mean every facet of your life, including the community around you. And incubators and accelerators and startup foundries are kind of the petri dish where that begins.
All right, to the group, what specific technology do you find to be the most significant in civilizing cyberspace from a security perspective this coming year?
So Tom, if I can go with that. Clearly, advanced technology is key in the cybersecurity area. What we're seeing our customers right now is insider threat, the ability to make sure that information is being used appropriately by authorized individuals. And advanced technologies looking at intentions, what really sort of the key area that we have in security. We can come up with the smartest next generation firewalls, but it gets back to the human element. And so understanding human intentions, human actions, and making sure that technology is there to help support the mission going forward, making sure that the information is secured.
I think it's important as well to have a broad view on different layers. One is, like you mentioned before, that we got the technology in place, next generation firewalls or software-defined networks. It's important. But what I felt when I went through Silicon Valley or as well in the Munich region is that the quantum computer will take place in the next 4, 5, or 6 years, and therefore we need to have an ecosystem in place to work with such kind of computers, because for our industry the cryptology is key to get all the secure data in place, secure communication. So quantum computer will take the advantage who is able to organize the ecosystem around the quantum computer. Of course, it's not a standalone technology. You need to embed those kind of technologies in big data or analytics or cognitive systems. So for me, as responsible for the cybersecurity, from the low end, from the software-defined networks up to the next generation firewalls, the SOC systems in place or SOC organizations managed, up to the crypto applications. That's the technology which we have take into account if we have a look in the future. And I agree to you, because it's not only technology, you need to have the right teams in place. So teams which are able to get the problem solved with different capabilities in the teams. Such kind of team approaches here, groups which are handling different APT or whatever threats you have got a task, so that you can solve all the different issues. Technology as a standalone view will not solve the problem. You need to have the humans in place which go to have the semantic view on this kind of threats, so that you will be able to manage everything which bubbles up in a short time frame. And therefore, this is what we just think about, how we organize our SOCs, that the Cyber Operating Center are organized not only via firewalls or CM systems, as well how we can use everything around machine learning and artificial intelligence, but always connected via a human interface. And so my message is not only we can't only look on the technology side of this kind of cyber threats. We have to have the right people in place which manage those things based on tasks or whatever you have.
Yeah, this is actually very consistent with one of the trends we're seeing, which is in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of energy and investment and innovation on finding out who the bad guy is. There's tons of technologies on trying to keep them out, anti-malware, APT, next gen, this and that. But there's been a real shift, I think, in the last 6 to 9 months and going forward into knowing kind of how your own security posture is. What is a system of record as a CISO or CIO where you can actually start measuring and managing and remediating all the different things you bought in the last couple of years. And I think that's going to be a real area in innovation, I think, and I think you touch upon that there too, which is, how do you orchestrate all this? How do you have a global single pane of glass where you can tie in all the data sources you get from your different vendors that you have bought to keep the bad guys out? So I do think, the vulnerability management landscape is going to be driving a lot of this innovation, and how they evolve that. You can see a kind of a Salesforce equivalent to happen in security, right? Salesforce is kind of that system of record for your sales guys, but where is that for the IT security professional? And I think that's going to be, we're already starting to see a lot of startups chip away at that, and I think there's going to be some big companies that emerge from that.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I think we've seen something very similar, and it's almost a reorienting the problem. A lot of discussion around security technology is typically around technology. When you rephrase the problem around, okay, well, instead of trying to find the bad guys, as Ping just mentioned, how do I proactively look at what do I actually have? What is actually in my IT environment? What are the obvious vulnerabilities where I should really just close those windows and close those doors and maybe turn the lock on, and maybe that'll be better. That kind of rudimentary pieces, it sounds really simple, but the reality is in a complex multinational IT company and complex IT environment, it's actually pretty hard to do. And actually some of the fastest growing companies that we've seen are companies that address that. Also, one of the big landscape shifts that's happened in all of software and impacts cyber in a huge way is something called DevOps, which is basically now every company, Domino's Pizza, for example, is a material software company. They are building software. It's just, in why, I mean, think about your own life. You're engaging with digitally in just about everything you do, even in the offline world. That means it's an explosion of software. It means it's also an explosion of risk. Well, are there some things we should be doing with developers to try to build security in earlier? That makes a lot of sense. There's been a lot of friction. Some of the fastest growing business we're seeing are starting to address that and getting adoption from developers. So just rephrasing, reorienting around that, I think, is a big deal. And frankly, it's shown up in the revenue trajectories for some of the vendors that are actually doing that.
Yeah, I would just add to that, thank you both for bringing that up, because probably one of my single biggest challenges that I have today is actually getting a dashboard or a single pane of glass about what my security posture is from day to day. That is, I was just at the RSA conference a couple months ago, met with more than a dozen vendors, told every single one of them, tooling, tooling, tooling. That is my biggest challenge today. How do I take 40 plus different security products that we have in our environment, pull all of that information together that tells me what our security posture is, and then from a governance standpoint, be able to convey that to the board of directors and to our management team. Very, very difficult today. And in fact, many cases, it takes a single person a day to pull data analytics, one day a month, from different tools that we have, because it's just incredibly difficult to do that. So I am very hopeful that we're going to start to see some more innovation in that based on different things that I'm hearing from different vendors. But it is, I would say, one of the biggest challenges from if you're a risk management professional, which is what I am, that it is trying to get an accurate view of my risk today can sometimes be very difficult.
All right. I agree that, I'll repeat it, kind of what used to work, I think won't work. And shifting from detection to prevention is where I think a lot of our investment is going. I have a very kind of different approach on what I'm most excited about. It's something called data cleansing. And if most of the ATPs and heat missile avoiding, sandbox avoiding malware threats out there are being embedded in, basic things, your email, your links, file attachments. If all data that came through was cleansed, and I'll translate cleansed to being replicated so the original files just stay outside your network, nothing's getting in. And it's moving to absolute prevention. Nobody in security likes to use the word absolute or 100%. But if data doesn't get in, the problem's not getting in as well, and that's an area that we're focused on. But more importantly, it's just moving from being proactive versus being reactive to the threats that we're familiar with.
I'll chime in here, being that I was a former CISO, and I work for a very large cybersecurity company. I think it's anything that can force the adversary to become resource constrained. How do you suppress their experience within your ecosystem, within your information supply chain? I think there are some unique solutions out there that have built upon previous legacy solutions that were deployed by the intelligence community, like deception technologies, where you have full OS traps that could allow you to decrease the dwell time of an adversary because you get 0 false positives that they're inside of your infrastructure if you position them correctly. But I also think the future of security and anti-fraud and cyber is really surrounds the identity of an individual, and authentication is still the Achilles heel. And if you cannot adaptively change authentication based on risk to private keys within your infrastructure, you're still going to lose against the advanced Russian adversary at all. And so how can you have an intelligent infrastructure that can adapt authentication based on threat or risk around the identities that give you access to the encrypted tunnels which the hackers run through on a regular basis? Okay, trick question. What makes a successful entrepreneur in cybersecurity? First part. Second part is, you have a successful entrepreneur in cybersecurity. What's more important, an effective head of sales or an effective head of marketing?
All right, I'll take that one since I'm closest to you. So, two-part question. The thinking changes by region and actually by the ecosystem that you're building startups in. If you're in the Valley, you can't grab a Starbucks without hitting a co-founding CTO, a CMO, and your newest head of sales. So there's an ecosystem out there. Out here on, call it Virginia, DC, Maryland, we don't have an ecosystem that's that robust. So you see a lot of first-time CEOs, which is amazing because technically that's not supposed to work. However, if you look at the demographics, the average age of a founding CEO in Silicon Valley in 2015 was 24.7 years old. The average age of a CEO out here is 31 years old. And there's a big difference, right? A lot of them have been working at a classified customer or a defense integrator or a research lab. They have a husband, they have taxes, a couple kids. It's a little bit more of a deeper risk profile when you say, hey, guess what, honey? I'm jumping in and doing a startup, right? So what makes a good entrepreneur down to the DNA never changes. Location, age, background, your guess is as good as mine. I've seen both, right? The DNA of somebody who is willing to take a risk and still be functional under the daily stress of that risk, both at home and at work, and with the constant guillotine that you can crash and burn and leave a very big crater, or the upside that you can save the world and make $1 gazillion. The person that can function in that environment is not unlike a person in special operations, right? You've got a high risk profile, high risk, high reward. So the DNA you see across the board, right? There are just some people you run into that should never, ever in a million years try to do a startup, and some that will do them till the day they can't do them anymore. What was the second part of your question?
If you had to choose between the head of sales or head of marketing, which one would you choose?
Wow, definitely head of sales. You know, there are people that could literally walk into a place with an MVP and convince you to rip FireEye out and put in their 6-month-old beta. Those people are worth gold. They're far and few between, but they're worth gold. Chief Marketing Officer is a very well needed position, but press for press sakes doesn't necessarily mean your product's going to sell faster. I'll take the head of sales any day.
So, you know, I agree with your characteristics of what makes a great entrepreneur. There's nothing specific to security. I think, you know, whether you're a consumer internet entrepreneur or mobile app developer, I think a lot of it is all the same. I would say we observed a difference in terms of a lot of the backgrounds of security entrepreneurs in the last couple of years. Historically, a lot of them had kind of that black hat or defense background, a lot of folks out of here and kind of the Israeli IDF type of world. In recent years, I think it's become a lot more broader. I think to the earlier part of our conversation where every tech industry is security related now. So we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurs that are just good software developers and or people with good strong data backgrounds. A lot of interesting technologies coming out of the internet data centers, whether it's Google or Facebooks of the world. So a lot of those type of entrepreneurs have solved problems at scale there, starting to start companies in the security space. So I just think the breadth of the backgrounds has really increased, which I think is great, because I think the multidisciplinary entrepreneurs tend to start the most interesting companies. In terms of sales versus marketing, you know, I really think it depends on where the company is targeting to in terms of who their customers are. If it's kind of sometimes the more developer-centric type products, you know, really strong marketing person is actually what you want to start with first. So I think it really depends, but nothing like a great sales guy if you're selling to IT organizations.
Yeah, I'll add on to that and maybe take the second question in a slightly different way, which is one of the things we've noticed since we get involved with companies when typically, you know, there's at least 10 million of revenue, often there's tens, it could be even over 100 million of revenue. So when we show up, usually there is, at minimum, particularly in security, a good product that's being, or a good particular technology in that current productization that's being accepted by customers. It's a good market, it stands out, it's differentiated, and usually there's some people that know how to sell it. I will say, and one of the big things that we do is we focus on that next couple $100 million of revenue and how those companies go and attain that next couple $100 million of revenue. I will say as you escape $100 million revenue scale and you look beyond that, two critical roles, and I think this is even more true, it's probably a truism, but it's probably even more true in security software, is a head of product and a head of marketing. And the reason why is some of the things that you're hearing here, which is you go to RSA, you see all these vendors, customers are sitting here saying, we've got big established IT environments, help me understand how you're going to fit in with the 40 other things that I have, why are you going to stand up for the crowd? So product is not just is taking technology, but then also addressing all the other things. How do you package it? How do you present it? How do you price it? How do you pull all that together in a compelling vision that addresses competition in the vendor landscape and the customer's current and IT environment? And marketing is how do you explain that in a way where you have an RSA? So I think both those two roles are really, I think they're critical, as I said, for any software company that's escaping 100 million in revenue and looking to charge ahead. And those are the vendors that, are the ones that typically end up standing out for the pack. I think it's even more important in security.
All right, well, with that, I think we should open up to the audience for any questions they might have for this esteemed panel.
Thank you very much. Elena Kvochko, Barclays Bank. Thank you very much for your nice comments about our work. I'm actually from the security division, so we work very closely with you and all the startups that you also mentor. So my question is, I feel like we as an enterprise, as a big company, we do have access to all those great technologies. And one thing that I'm very passionate about is how do we share this and make it accessible to a broader ecosystem. So for instance, we on Barclays side, we've initiated major initiatives, that relate to kind of working with startups, but also encouraging more diversity in the industry. We now brought our number of women in security to 30%, which is actually, much more than a lot of other companies. And we sponsor projects that, for instance, link autism and how can we better leverage people with autistic abilities and potentially hire them, so things like that. But from your perspective, what can we all do to kind of democratize access to those security technologies and the latest innovation that we have, and what can we do to kind of support the ecosystem? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, just very briefly, kind of from my own experience, we are working broadly kind of in the banking sector with the consortium banks, right? It's not I think everyone's recognizing that the problem is too big to finance kind of individually, and many people are coming together to test, to vet, to get their hands around what's out there, what's working. It's great for the startup community because you get, if you're successful, you get to a lot of customers all at once and vice versa. I think, people are starting to rely on other people, and there's just a limited number of people out there today who really understand what's going on, who are in the industry. And I think that collaboration and cooperation is very welcome. It's ironic, in my view, just because a lot of the people who are driving the industry technologically come out of places where they want to keep everything to themselves and very secretive, and they kind of switch gears when they come out. So I think it's happening. It's a natural process. It's being driven by economics more than anything else, and efficiency. And I expect we'll see more of that in the near future.
I think also it involves the capacity of understanding that young people don't have to feel that they have to be coders, that they could be translators, that they could be effective in providing strategic thought or cognitive thought to an organization. It's not just about an IT problem or a security problem anymore. This is a brand protection problem. And the more people familiarize themselves with the different ways in which they can add value through translation of the various issues across business lines, like the nexus between brand protection and cybersecurity, I think it'll be more apt to join the forces of those of us who want to actually defend.
So thanks everybody for being here. For those of us who are here, this is just an amazing group of folks and very distinguished folks in the field. So we really appreciate you guys all being here. Thanks so much. I do agree that a good salesperson is, that's one in a million. My name's Jamie Dos Santos. I'm one of the founders of a company called Cybersecurity. It's an AI analytic company. We're in our 3rd year, so we're kind of out of trouble, but still, pushing pretty hard. And so one of the things I haven't heard you guys talk about, and I would really love to hear your thoughts on, is just where you're putting your valuations. We talked kind of about what technologies you kind of, were looking for and kind of put some weight on, but the company before this one was a company called Terramark, and it went for 19 times EBITDA. I mean, it was a big exit. It was infrastructure and services. This one is just MRR. And so just, talk a little bit, if you don't mind. Are you looking for, times revenue, are you still on the EBITDA? And certainly on the early stages of companies, where are you, how are you doing your valuations? 10 times, 15 times, what excites you to get you up to those multipliers?
I'll start. That's a very tough question. Valuations, just like a baby, are the beauties in the eye of the beholder, right? So there are things that I'm very passionate about, and I just think I'm just going to open my pockets, and my 2 co-founders are like, you're a knucklehead. We'll never flip, right? The same thing happens across the board. Now, when you're talking at a certain stage, you're going for your B round, or you're going for your C or your D round, there are other metrics that people will look at. The quality of your revenue, the continual uptick, how strong your product development is, right? Because you're a very different company going from 10 million to 20 than you are from 50 to 100. So a lot of it you look at, what is the track record? What is the industry you're in? What's the quality of your revenue? And then is this the team, or do they have the ingredients to get to that next level, which is where you start getting your ROI as an investor, right? So if you put yourself in the shoe of an investor, depending upon what stage you are as a company, you'll kind of understand what their motivation is. So you're looking at one company and you're evaluating, if we put in, what is the likelihood that they will get to this stage where we get our ROI or beyond, right? And so there's a whole soup of ingredients that go into that. The founders that got it to one point may not be the people, and most likely aren't, that lead it to another. Are they willing to accept that? Is the customers adopting it? And are they going to be able to go to that next stage by really pouring gas on it? So it's a tough question. It depends upon the company, the stage, all kinds of things. But what I'm seeing is valuations are normalizing. What do I mean by normalizing? That's a stupid word to say they're going down in some industries, right? In security, it goes up and down just like every other industry. There's hype, and then there's, people put the brakes on. I only speak from what I'll call the cybersecurity, big data, or analytics area, and we see that in all of those. But you are seeing a more dip your toe in the water type of thing. Now, there are a lot of venture that follow suit. So somebody else is kind of the trail dog that does the due diligence. Well, if they're in, then I'm gonna ride on the back of that. But there is a lot slower release of money today, a lot heavier due diligence, and the larger funds need to write bigger checks. So, the days of walking in and asking for, a 6 million A round with some of the top 12, it's difficult. They have billion-dollar-plus funds. It's very hard to write a $5 million check. It just doesn't move the needle to that level. So you're seeing both. You're seeing both valuations kind of a little bit more tepid pushback, and you're seeing where the focus is on larger funds going at it. I know that didn't answer the specific question you have, but I'm not sure there is an exact answer for how you value something. It's such a deeper conversation, right? It's like saying, how do you hit a home run? I don't know, but there's a lot involved in it,
Part of that is a lot of folks just are really looking for that team. You know, they're really looking for the right team, starting with the founders, but, you know, the executive management team, like you said, it's not always the original founders that are going to take it to the next level. We certainly experienced that going from 0 to, you know, way up in big numbers. And so I agree with you, and you always want to see that the predecessor is there to be able to take, and they're young and they're energetic and all that stuff. And so part of the question was, you know, are you weighting that a little bit more than you might be on, you know, where is the weight of things?
I'll let Ping answer that one.
I was hoping I don't have to answer
Handed it
valuation
off.
questions. We usually avoid valuation questions because it gets used against us down the road somehow.
It does, exactly.
You know, I think it for us, because we have two funds, a venture fund and growth equity fund. On the seed Series A side, valuations really haven't changed that much. You know, these are pre-revenue, really early stage opportunities. They may go up 1 year and they may go down 1 year, but, you know, we're just really trying to target, you know, a level of ownership that gets alignment around the cap table. I think what you're talking about is kind of the late stage, the kind of C and D
When you're
rounds.
ready to buy, you know, like where, you know,
Yeah,
we're
those-
out looking for something.
Yeah, those have really compressed a lot over the last 2 years. That's why I think the biggest compression has been on the valuation side is kind of that C, D, E range. And then once you hit to the growth side, I think, you know, Richard knows as well as I do, there's plenty of high valuation opportunities there too if the company's growing.
Yeah, that's true. I think the way, so again, I'm at the growth stage and at the later stage. You know, we're kind of typically the last round of capital into a company, and sometimes we're the first and last round into a company. And so we look at kind of when we would get our money out, which you typically look to the public markets, if nothing else, as a proxy for what private valuations could be in an M&A exit. And the reality is, for this true of security, you'll have a couple examples of aberrations for it, but, you know, software companies are trading at, you know, revenue multiples more or less in the 4 to 6 times range, even for growth companies at scale. So that kind of normalized a few years ago. I think 14 was the apex of that, took a big step down, and is pretty much leveled out at that. So when we look to get involved in a company, we kind of know what the multiples are going to be on the way out, and hopefully you'll be one of the special ones that get beyond that. But we just kind of work backwards and say, there's always revenue when we're evaluating a company. We really get into the quality of it very, very quickly. And that's actually our first litmus test. So, you know, these are typically almost all recurring revenue businesses, and we really lock in on the momentum, the growth momentum, the sales and marketing expenditure that's necessary to create that growth momentum, how that is scaling, and then retention. And you do a very quick and hard screen on that. And honestly, a lot falls out pretty quickly. If you have those ingredients, though, that means you got a shot at pulling off really material growth at scale. And that means, and that fundamentally is how we're going to make money. These companies, we invest at a certain size, they're going to get a heck of a lot bigger. And so that's what we are typically locked in on. And we're not, you know, when it comes to team, when it comes to product, when it comes to a lot of other things, I mean, honestly, we're willing to take on quite a bit of company building. You know, it's okay if you don't have everything figured out. By the way, you're building a growing company. If you had everything figured out, you know, you wouldn't need people like us. So we recognize that. But those kind of couple things, that's what matters a lot. And yeah, if you have that, you'll have us and a lot of other folks like us eager to give you money, and that means valuations go up. If you don't, it's a lot tougher.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.
I had a question about what excites you about a couple of different industries where I think we need some help. One of them new, the other one old. Hyper-converged technology, where it's all software, which is both good and bad news. And the second one is in the area of multi-factor or federated identity management, what you see as really game changers in that industry.
Well, for authentication, game changer is authentication that can react to risk or threat authentication that you can overlay second and third factors of authentication on an individual or device or a session specific to the amount of risk that's being sustained to that infrastructure of the individual through that single pane of glass. Can you in-person prove someone without in-person proving them and then re-verify who they are, and then at the same time escalate up authentication based on risk to that individual or device? There's capabilities out there that can achieve that. But to your first part of the question, I would submit that in the end of days, hyperconverged environments are going to necessitate you having that adaptive authentication schema done correctly, or you can't actually successfully maintain a safe and sound environment.
And what do you see in those markets that is,
The challenge with authentication and identity is the fact that most CISOs, it's not their responsibility. Okay,
It's a physical
and
security.
someone else's responsibility, just like in most financial institutions, forgive me for over-speaking. Fraud, traditional fraud and money laundering are not part of, let's say, her bailiwick. I'm just generalizing here, but they should be. And there's the nexus between anti-money laundering and fraud and know thy customer and cybersecurity, which all surrounds this identity play that we're just talking about here.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in on that. So I actually do have identity and access management in my remit. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you're right. On the fraud, anti-money laundering, and cybersecurity nexus, there does, in fact, in most large organizations need to be better integration and nexus around the authentication and the identification of particularly potentially fraudulent or malicious actors. One of the things that I've been seeing recently, though, that is kind of an interesting new technology, which has to do, and we're actually experimenting with it right now, is around ambient sound authentication. So obviously we have a lot of call centers and a lot of folks that call into our various bank representatives. And so how can we start to look at voice authentication in addition to that extra factor of ambient sound patterns? So that's something we're actually looking at right now. We're also doing some facial recognition authentication, and particularly one of our bank charities that we've had for many, many years is for visually impaired individuals around the world. And so how do we do authentication for them that doesn't require typing in something on a keyboard? So that's something that we're also looking at is, what are those other types of authentication attributes, if you will, that we can use to authenticate them into our
So you're using facial rec on the client side, okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Brett Young, CSRI. I've been attending this for a couple of years now, and I don't think I've ever seen a panel quite like this one. So it's good to sort of get this perspective. Thank you very much for coming and doing this. Most panels here.
Was that a compliment, or was that?
Well, you just used the word I was about to, which is that most panels here typically deal with government, and I want to sort of bring things back around to that. For folks here who are on the private sector side, and that's just about everybody, what are some of the elements of governments that you've dealt with which have made them really friendly or receptive to incubators that have been created? Talking about the national level, at the local or state level. I know St. Louis was mentioned earlier with the Silicon Prairie. Did that evolve with government assistance, or was it completely without any government assistance locally? That'd be interesting to hear about. And also, from the government perspective, Mr. Mühleck and maybe also Ms. McGuire, given that you used to be at DHS, what do you see as to why incubators form in certain places as well? Like why in Munich, for example? Why did things take off there? And also maybe from government, at what point do companies reach a level where you want to purchase or where government begins doing business with some of these small companies? Thank you.
I think it's necessary that people like me join the government so that you get the interaction between the industry and on the one hand, on the governmental processes on the other, and there's a total different thinking in such kind of organization. So if you take the administration as an example, or a big company like Raytheon or Daimler or Siemens, they are totally different. So what we need is an interaction between the private sector and the administration sector. And in between you will find these innovative companies, the innovators, the incubators, which can build bridges, but that's not all. At the end, the administration as well has to accept that digital transformation is there. It's not any longer in the future, it's today's business. And it's not only infecting cybersecurity, it's infecting each process in each organization, especially in the government as well. E-governance processes, as an example. Yeah? Data protection, everything which is done mostly in the industry today as well it has to take care in the public government as well. And our processes in the governmental environment are so slow, as I can feel now in the last 6 months. They are not as agile as we did it in the industry. So if I take agile methods like design thinking or Scrum sessions, so this is what we need as well in a public environment, but we are far away from such kind of agile methods. So to get incubators, startups in our community, in the governmental environment, you need to have these modern methods in place, and you can invite the startup community to be part of a design thinking workshop. So together with your old guys here around the old IT environment. So if you talk, it's not old if I talk to Microsoft or IBM or HP, but if you connect HP, Microsoft with the startup scene and bring those organizations in a design thinking workshop to an administrational environment, that works. And that brings you, on the one hand, the investment capabilities which are needed to invest in future-oriented technologies. So my advice is on that we connect more the industry capabilities with administration capability and vice versa. We in Germany are not so connected to that kind of thing. I'm not quite sure how it works in the US. I think it works better than in Germany. Maybe you can give me your advice on that, but the attempt, like me, from an industry, I served as an executive vice president in one of the biggest German companies. It's a total different approach than to work as a CIO in the Department of Defense. And therefore we need to have this mindsets organized, and that's necessary from my point of view as well, to get more agile in administration, to get the innovation guys included. It was as well the reason that we decided to have this Cyber Innovation Hub in place. This is the first attempt in Germany in one of the administrations to bring in people from the startup community, that they manage our future in this disruptive technology. So you have to be agile on the one hand, and you have to take the decisions to make that happen.
And let me amplify Klaus's remarks. You know, one of the things that a company like Raytheon can do, and we sort of feel it's our job, is to help government, because government at the national level, at the state level, they're not as nimble as commercial companies. And certainly aerospace companies are not as nimble as new startups and straight commercial companies that are not associated with having close ties with the U.S. government. So one of the things that we try to do is we do try to look for those brand new technologies that can be brought in, that we can show to our customers in the case of the government. But again, one of the things we've tried to do in Raytheon, this is the partnership that we have, this joint venture with ForcePoint, which is a commercial company. And they have a different pace. They have a commercial pace which is more rapid than a standard aerospace company. And so, Klaus, that's part of how we try to do that, to be able to bring in those advanced technologies, show those to our government customers, and help them by solving their tough problems with that new technology.
Let me phrase the challenge, I think, for government in this way. So where I live is with fast-growing companies. These are all private sector that have winning products. They've got growth, they've got momentum. A lot of people want to buy their products, more and more want to buy it. A lot of time, I'll pick on US Fed for a second. A lot of folks will, and the companies we're involved with or looking at, will look at U.S. Federal and say, that's a great market, they should totally use our stuff. In fact, they'll be, even our value prop in commercial will be even stronger in federal. Well, when you're sitting in one of these growth stage companies, then you're sitting there, okay, well, what's the investment we need to make to go to access that? Well, I need to hire really a world-class federal sales lead, because honestly, the procurement, all the things you need to do to sell the federal is so different than what you need to sell the private sector. Well, and then that person's not cheap. Then they need to have sales reps. They need to have sales engineers. They need to have other marketing and channel support, because you have to go get channel typically to sell in the government. And when you add, and often there's a product investment because there's idiosyncrasies there. You add this all up, and then, oh, by the way, it's going to take a while. So this is probably a 1 to 2 year investment before you get revenue back. So you sit there at the board level and you say, wow, well, maybe we should just go hire some more commercial sales reps, because that'll be easier. By the way, government, these are the products you want. They're working in the private sector. Get them in. So I think that's the practicalities of commercialization. So, where you can get help, either through important partners that are already well entrenched in government and can help address that friction. Whether there's other types of programs, this sounds pretty cool actually, what you guys are doing. But when you're sitting on the vendor side, to get this kind of winning product and technology from the private sector into commercial, that's the practical friction that you have to deal with.
One other way to look at the collaboration that is from a different angle is cybersecurity is one of the areas where I think the federal government actually is a thought leader in relative to the commercial sector. And I think it would be helpful to expose some of those technologies to the private sector, who I think are getting pummeled these days by, a lot of multinationals, hackers that are well government sponsored. And I think, I know there's complexities with that, given that a lot of the technology is to protect the country, but a lot of the critical infrastructure that the private sector runs and operates is, I think, part of the country's mission critical assets, right? So how do you balance that, and how do you drive innovation into the startup community, leveraging some of the technologies that the U.S. government has built that is very incredibly advanced, that I think can be used for a broader set of consumers and enterprises? And I think that's one of the things that I think has been talked about a lot, and I think it's an important conversation that needs to keep happening, because cybersecurity is one of the technology areas where I do think the public sector, the private sector benefits significantly from the public innovation.
That's a good point. I think the other thing too is, by the way, the definition of government. We're in Washington, D.C., we think about federal. I was talking to CISO at an NFL city, and the stuff that's coming, unfortunately that person had federal cybersecurity background, went into this NFL city to help them basically build up their defenses. It's astounding, the stuff that's coming through now in state and local government level, and they do not have that kind of level of resourcing. So I think getting help from the private sector, as well as some of the things Ping just mentioned, are really important.
One thing I'd also add is that for highly regulated industries like mine, it's really important to get the regulators comfortable with new technologies that are coming on board. Because one of their most significant concerns is, does it introduce new risk? It's not just about what's the latest control point that it's closing off, but does it potentially introduce new risk into the ecosystem or into your specific environment? And so it's really helpful to be able to have those conversations with regulators to inform them about what these new technologies are, and also around the safety points of them. You specifically asked also about how others around the world, particularly regulators and governments, are looking at fintech and helping to build the ecosystem. So there's a couple things that I did want to mention. One is that the Singapore government has got a lot of activity around this. Last November, they hosted a whole month called In November, Innovation November, which was all around promoting fintech and big data analytics companies. We're actually doing a couple of joint projects with the Singapore regulators right now, looking at some distributed ledger technologies, as well as some identity and access management new tech. And then the EU last February, just in February, announced a whole new fintech project, a lot of investment and consultation that they're going to be putting in. And then the UK, just a few weeks ago, launched their own fintech. So when you think about fintech, it's not just around financial services technology, but it also includes a lot of times big data analytics and cybersecurity technologies as well. And I think it's obvious that many governments are starting to promote this, and they're starting to look at how they can help grow this innovation economy in their own regions.
Three things really quickly from the Israeli experience. The Israeli government, and I'm not a big proponent of government involvement in the private sector, is one of the biggest investors in early stage startups. So 20 years ago, they realized that providing high risk capital for early stage startups made a lot of sense. That continues through today. They've doubled down specifically in the field of cybersecurity with dedicated funds for cyber startups, and I think it's a very positive involvement of the government in the early stage of startups, where many private investors aren't willing to take the risk or are looking for leverage. Two, we've seen specifically, and maybe Israel's a very unique situation where many people in the cyber units within the intelligence complex work in the private sector and do reserve duty and well into their mid-40s. So you have a relationship between government agencies, new technologies moving in both directions, and somebody made the point about the government sharing with this innovation with the industry. I think Israel realizes that's okay to encourage that. Where it needs to be regulated, it regulates, and where it doesn't, it just lets it go. You don't have the government holding people back. And the last thing, which is just an interesting story that was publicized, otherwise probably wouldn't talk about it, but Iranian hackers had hacked one of the major banks in Israel. And the regulator actually came very quickly to the startup community to look for a solution to the specific problem, because there was not a solution in its arsenal or in the kind of government infrastructure. So just three separate stories around Israeli government involvement in the industry.
I'm Mike Nelson. I do public policy for Cloudflare, which is a web security firm, and we're still sort of a startup. We're 7 years old and growing very rapidly. I have a two-part question. So first, I'm going to ask you to look back and tell me any horror stories you have about policy-induced bankruptcies at startups, where government policy really ruined the business model for a company. And then also I'd like you to look forward and explain any cases where you've seen startups really worried about changes in policy or reinterpretation of regulation that could really hurt their growth curve. So
I wouldn't say this is a destruction of a company, but the overt bias to define security as encryption based on the ITU Digital Signature Act from the early 2000s has created a lot of the problem of lack of proactive investment in the space. And I hope that when the GDPR regulations come down and people have to appoint a data protection officer at the C level, that their definition of protection goes far beyond encryption.
So I fought that battle myself. I founded Silent Circle and BlackPhone, encrypted communication. And after Snowden, you can almost set your calendar to every October. Some intelligence agencies, this side of the pond and that side, come out and say, we're going dark, right? So here you are sweating, here comes regulation, right? But it doesn't happen, and I'll tell you why. Most of the time in the last 15 years, you don't see a lot of that happening. It's because money finds a way. Commerce finds a way, right? Now there is tech in certain industries that are built on the fringe, where we learned in the 2010, 2012, for instance, solar, right? You start building the solar company, oops, trade happens, China can produce it at 1/7 of what you are. You either adapt or you die, which is most of the case. So is that a government regulation issue? Not per se, but anytime you're building products that are global, which a lot of the tech industry does. I mean, it doesn't get the same, fanfare that software does, but you're at the whim of any type of regional, an EU, North America, NAFTA, tensions. But as far as software, I have yet to see a real industry, absolute, here it is today, tomorrow the lights shut off, for a real large segment. There are fringe companies that do certain things that, kind of sit on a ledge. But the other side of it is, I think lobbyists have done a really good job as well. So you used to see very quick trigger fingers. This must go, right? And then they go, oh, what did we just do? Now there seems to be a little more concerted effort to take a look at various industries. Tax is a great one, right? You got a lot of startups who are saying, look, we could cut the tax code down in half. Well, try telling that to H&R Block and, the $170 billion worth of, personal tax accountants that do that. I don't think that's ever a smart go-to-market plan. Probably not in my lifetime, right? Maybe it'll change. But I don't see a lot of industry in tech, government policy that just shuts down an entire segment overnight.
Any other horror stories? Thanks.
All right, this will be the last question.
Thanks, Tom. So I guess given that's going to be the last question, I'll go with one that's a little bit more broad and fun to kind of speculate about. So given where you sit in your field, the next 5 years, where do you see your industry going? Where do you see the threat landscape going?
Well, the threat landscape, we're already seeing it now in terms of more and more destructive attacks being leveraged and more secondary and tertiary schemes of monetization using the brands against their constituencies. You're seeing a dramatic shift from smash and grab burglary to home invasion to now arson as part of counter-incident response, as illustrated by a number of studies and documentation vis-a-vis the deployment of wipers and other mechanisms, or even ransomware without asking for ransom into systems as a punitive measure. I'm extremely troubled by state actors who didn't have the capability previously, like Iran and North Korea, and who now do, who have the resolve to leverage attacks against information supply chains, emulating the Chinese or the Russians from that regard. And I'm extremely concerned about the fact that there's been such a widespread colonization of U.S. infrastructure over the years, which is why we continue to have these conferences, that we've never fully cleaned it up efficiently or effectively. And I think we're still dealing with a contagion of rats that needs to be cleaned up before we can step forward.
I think I would say real quick, the thing for me I see is ICS, Industrial Control Systems, and IIoT. As more and more factories, Campbell soup cans now have, 2,100 robotic machines and cars are built with it. Smart cities. Singapore's a great example. Sensors in every road. Easy Pass is, so 10 years ago, right? You walk in a mall and they have beacons now, passive. So when I worry, do I worry, the doomsday that, some cyber weapon's going to shut everything? No, but that is a concern as more and more of our world over the next 5 years becomes quote unquote industrialized, as well as the services we rely on become consolidated, and to that far fringe, as more and more of your life, your identity is attached to your Nest thermos, which is attached to the bill you pay on your iPhone, which gives you the authentication to buy the bunny slippers off of Amazon. Identity theft on the consumer side, as well as fraud in the bank, has much larger ramifications than it did, just 3 years ago.
Yeah, I just to drive a finer point through, I actually think in the next 5 years, what's going on with edge computing and how that's getting embedded into every single device in the home, I think that's going to be the next kind of frontier that hackers are going to go after, right? I mean, if you look at the startups that we see, we have every single smart coffee maker, refrigerator, blender, microwave you can think of. And I think that's just going to be an attack surface that I don't think we even can kind of fathom how broad and how deep that can impact society.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest concerns is the continued erosion of trust. Trust in the devices we use, trust in the economic systems that we rely on, trust in our governments. And so all of the threats that Tom mentioned are top of mind and big concerns, but ultimately what does that lead to? It leads to an erosion of trust. And so, when I drive on the street, I trust that the light's gonna work. I don't know if I can trust that anymore. So do I go through the light because it's green, or do I not? So, that's a very basic, simple example, but I think that, sort of the big existential question is what becomes of society if we can't trust any of the mechanisms or the technology that we use, and we really have to do something more in the security space to bring that trust factor back.
I think the gold rush will continue. There will be many attempts by many entrepreneurs. This industry is going to grow phenomenally. I'm sure there'll be many failures, but also some great fortunes will be made.
Like I think all of us in this room, the security threat is just going to get harder and harder and more of a challenge. IoT is just the start. And I think the way that we're going to have to deal with that is a multi-path. One is basic, and it starts with basic cyber hygiene and making sure that we are teaching everyone starting in kindergarten through college what they should do. Because if you take a look at what is happening with Mariah, et cetera, they were devices that just didn't have the appropriate security protocols, or they were with default passwords, right? So I think it starts with cyber hygiene, basic cyber hygiene, doing the basic blocking and tackling, making sure that you've got regular data backups. That is the basic thing. So there has to be an awareness throughout the world that we just need to do that. And then it is going to be advanced technology. It is going to be things like, how do you hide the attack surface? If we have a communication system, we have communication protocols, can we structure that in such a way that it just goes away for all but a handful of users, and to basically change the game? So it's going to be both basics, and it's also going to be advanced.
Yeah, I would say the amount of just our human activity that's becoming digitized and networked. Just look at your phone and look what's on there, and what's now digitally recorded in some way, shape, or form wasn't before, and that's happening everywhere as software bleeds everywhere. I think this problem is just going to confound and continue to grow. I do think that there will be, 5 years from now, probably a new crop of at least a half dozen independent, new leading security vendors that are kind of on the horizon today, and I think hopefully they will be doing a lot to try to address some of this.
Yes, the world is getting more and more real-time. This is what we learned in the last couple of years, that IoT systems, real-time systems, event systems are game changers. And based on that technologies, we need to have all the stakes under evaluation. So if we talk about cybersecurity, for us as the responsible IT professionals, we need to have security by design in the future. And my message is, if we talk about cyber policies, we need to have a kind of architectural frame under control in the future, so that we are secure, more secure than we are today. And this is what my core message is. The real-time world needs to have real-time reaction. And real-time reaction means that we are more intelligent in our people's and technology view on cybersecurity in that world. And as I grew up in a real-time world, so in shop floor control systems, this is what we had in the 80s and in the 90s. As today, everything is connected cars, smart homes. All of those things will be secured, and it's a kind of front-loading process we need so that we are more intelligent in the front of those processes, having our architecture under control, so the chief architects, the chief security officers are key for us in the future. So my message is that as a conclusion, yes, react more intelligent in our IT world in the future than it was in the past.
Thank you. The floor is yours.